Okay, so this one is part of a series of different types of trees in the distance and closer up in the foreground. So I'm going to show you today an ash tree. An ash tree is the one I've picked out. This is my reference for the shape of the tree. It's quite a different shape again, and the colours are quite cool on an ash tree. So to pick that out, I've decided to use lemon yellow. So I tend to look at the colours to say if they're warm or cool, and cool colours tend to be more lemony with the greens, and warm colours tend to be more orangey. So if you think about the yellow that you're mixing with the blue to make the green, that's really a useful tip. So the lemon yellow, I popped a little bit of water on the page. I'm going to take a tiny bit of the cobalt blue in. You should always start with the yellow and add a tiny bit of blue to it. If you try and change blue to green, it's going to take a lot of paint. So this is nice and thick and it's on a round number 6 brush, and I'm just going to look at the shape. It's nice and wet. Just focus. It's more of it's like I'm doing little ends to get that shape. Every tree type is different. It's little ends and it's sweeping down. If it looks a bit too yellow in places, take a little bit more blue in. Still carrying on doing my little ends, tiny little ends. Come over this that's a little bit too yellow. Still nice and wet, building it up. I'm rinsing that brush off, and I'm going to just dab into a little bit of sepia. So we've got a really long trunk. This is still my round number 6, I've not changed brush. Take a little bit of water off. Then you can bring those branches through. It's a very different shaped tree. If it spreads too far, you just want a clean, nearly dry brush, and you're just going to lift a little bit out. I'm just lifting out from the bottom, and I can just soften that bottom edge in. So for a bigger tree in the foreground, with that little bit more detail, I'm still going to go wet in wet. I think it will work better that way. And I'm going to use a cotton bud. So this is just a standard cotton bud. I'm mixing into those 2 colours again, and then just dabbing. Try and hold this still. Nice dabbing action. Keep dabbing into the different colours. Apologies that the paper's moving so much. I didn't realise that this dabbing action with the cotton bud was going to make it move so much. Still trying to pick up the different colours so that every single time I go in it's a slightly different mix. Just a case of building this up. Some areas are wetter than others, but it's still working really well because you want some level of detail. As long as it's not all hard or all soft, it just tends to work when you're doing something like this. If it's got a bit of both. Got to keep moving the cotton bud around. So don't just dot, dot, dot. It's not pointillism. We're using it and stroking it a little bit on the paper as well. Okay, and then I can come in to do a trunk. So this is my round number 6 and some sepia. So I'm just going to do the outside edges, get the shape in. Start to bring this up and through. It's going all different directions. And then I'm just going to dab my brush it in some water, just bring it through that tree trunk. And then I've got those darker edges, but it's lighter in the centre. You can just bring in all these branches now. Try to use the biggest brush you can for the job. I always say use the brush you're comfortable with, but try to use the biggest one you can so you don't end up too detailed and too what I call scratchy. It can become too dry. A big brush holds more paint, flows better. I'm going to swap down to my long thin rigger. And then I could come through with some finer branches. And we're just breaking through the foliage. You can go overlap the foliage in places if you want to. And you're just making sure everything's got a branch going to it in some way, shape or form, so that it's not floating in midair. This is a really interesting tree. Very different shape. You tend to get into your head what a tree looks like, especially when you've been painting for a long amount of time and you just think, oh, I know what a tree is. Unless it's a very obviously different tree like a Christmas tree or a fir tree, you just do a tree. So it's really interesting to spend some time studying the different shapes and really realising how different each type is. Each variety has something a little bit different about it. always learning. Even now, every time I do something, I paint something, I'm learning from that picture. Never changes. If I'm not learning, then I'm not a good artist. There's always things you can improve upon. Just adding a few bits of texture in there. I'm still going with that less is more, even though it's fairly detailed, this tree. I'm not going to go mad. Okay, so that's a ash tree.